Hi, the Dans are back. We managed to survive another session of the legislature. We haven't had any nights where we're going to bed at 5 in the morning anymore. I've found that food tastes better now that we're not in a legislative session. But we're feeling a little better rested and ready to talk to you about what happened. The last 72 hours, as always, were pretty crazy. One of the dominant themes of the session kind of came to a head in the last few days, which was this difference in culture and style between the House and the Senate. Tell me a little bit about what you saw and how things turned out.
Yeah, I think there was a really kind of philosophical difference between the two chambers that kind of especially showed up at the kind of final week of the session. A lot of newer members of the House, more progressive, and they pushed a lot of bills that then kind of stalled a little bit in the Senate. So we saw, especially on the budget, a minimum wage bill, also on a tax package that included some tax increases, and then also an ethics commission, these kind of four high-profile issues that all kind of came down to having to work out compromises in the last 72 hours of the session, and they were all resolved, but I think it was kind of a learning experience for some of these new House members that the Senate maybe isn't quite the rubber stamp on some of these progressive policies.
And we saw some cases where the two chambers didn't work out their differences. The Senate did not have much interest at all in taking up marijuana legalization. Didn't look like the votes were there for that. The couple of different proposals for tapping into the land grant permanent fund to increase money for early childhood education programs, that didn't make it through the Senate. And then there were a variety of instances, as Dan mentioned, where legislation underwent substantial changes before it was passed. So looking ahead, we're in the middle of the bill signing period for us. We're still busy looking at legislation. The governor has signed, the biggest high-profile bill that she's signed recently has been the Energy Transition Act, which is a bill that could have huge consequences for New Mexico. It sets out a path for a carbon-free energy future for New Mexico. Some pretty ambitious targets are in there. And it was one of the most dramatic nights in the session. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, that was the night, especially in the Senate, where there was a 4-hour filibuster on the Senate floor. They had to bring back some senators who've gone to play in the charity basketball game. Pretty memorable night in the Senate, which eventually did pass the bill, and it passed through the House on a pretty decisive margin as well. So that's certainly one that will have a sizable impact. We're still waiting for the governor to act on some other bills, including the budget, which she does have line item veto authority, which means she could go in and axe little parts of the budget if she wants to. We're expecting, obviously, action on that, capital outlay bill, and some others before a week from Friday. So we'll certainly be keeping a close eye on those. In all, the legislature passed more than 300 bills, which was, I think, their highest total in a decade. So a lot to keep track of and still kind of keep our eyes on as the signing period progresses.
It was really a stunning difference from the last couple of years when the Republican governor, Susana Martinez, was largely at odds with both chambers. This time when we walked up for the post-session news conference, Michelle Lujan Grisham, the newly elected Democrat, she called it a celebration, and everybody seemed to be on the same page. She was with some Democratic legislative leaders talking about accomplishments, and it is a far cry from 2 years ago when about half the bills were vetoed, major chunks of the budget were vetoed, and there was eventually a special session. So it could be a much different bill signing period. We didn't get any suggestion that there are a lot of vetoes awaiting the bills that have passed. So it looks like, for good or ill, whether you support the Democratic majority or not, this is certainly a productive session from their point of view that a lot of these bills are going to become law.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, though, too, there are still some other issues kind of to be continued that we expect to see come back next year. We'll be getting new revenue estimates as well this summer, which will kind of play a major role in shaping some of that debate. But the governor even testified on the permanent fund measure before a Senate committee, which is, I believe, twice, which is a pretty rare thing for a governor to do. So some of these that didn't pass this year, they'll be back. But as for this year, there is, certainly a lot of action. Kind of the logjam was broken on some of these issues, and be interesting to see kind of how that translates then into them becoming law.
And of course, we're already heading into the 2020 election cycle and preparing for the 2020 session. Tom Udall today announced his plans to forego a re-election bid. That will almost certainly set off a scramble among Democrats and Republicans who are going to try and position themselves for that seat. An open Senate seat does not come around very often. We also may see some primary challenges, perhaps, for some of the more conservative and moderate Senate Democrats. Of course, the governor has already given us an indication of what she's going to put on the 2020 legislative agenda. She mentioned the possibility of marijuana legalization, and it's pretty clear that she's also going to continue pushing for early childhood education funding. So kind of thinking more broadly over the next year or two, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I think just when we were looking forward to a few quiet months, we have some major political announcements. And I think knowing this governor, I think we'd expect. She only got to be in office for a few weeks before the session started, so I think we'll really start to see maybe some more executive orders, shaping of state government and things like that as well, kind of starting to leave her mark a little bit. And she's certainly shown that she's not shy about making changes and shaking things up. So I think we'll be looking at that, keeping an eye on the political scene, and trying to get reacquainted with our families a little bit in the meantime.
So thank you for everyone who's been reading our stories, whether in print or online or watching us on video, following us on social media. We really appreciate all of the support, and we encourage everyone to support local journalism however you can, and we're very thankful for it. So I'm Dan McKay, and this is Dan Boyd, and we appreciate your help.
Yeah, and thanks for following along during the session.